Now let's move back a little in film history, but further along within the storyline of Shakespeare's play. From the mid-1930s, Laurence Olivier was recognised as one of Britain's foremost classical actors and later stage directors of his generation. In 1943, literally in the middle of World War II, Olivier was invited by the Ministry of Information to produce a filmed version of Shakespeare's most explicitly patriotic history play, Henry V. This film was intended by His Majesty's government of the day to serve as a morale-boosting propaganda exercise for all of the British, who were then a nation at war. Henry V was a very large-scale Technicolor production indeed, with highly creative set designs for the old Wooden Globe Theatre and for the 14th century Book of Hours style of the court of the French king. There is also lavishly expensive location shooting for the battle scenes. Olivier first shortened the text considerably, then cast himself as King Henry, and then, no other suitable film director being willing or available, decided to direct the film himself. The film was a huge popular and critical success, playing well in both Britain and the USA. The film remains expressive and diverting even today. So when, in 1948, Olivier came to direct himself in a film of Hamlet, having already succeeded more than once with the role on stage, his autobiography reports that he knew exactly where he wanted to focus this film version of the play. Happily, Olivier's film of Hamlet was also a commercial success. It is, if I have read the records aright, the only Shakespeare text film ever to win the Oscar for Best Film and Best Actor, and the equivalent British BAFTA award also. It was well reviewed in the main, being recognised as a psychological interpretation of Hamlet's dilemma. The text was heavily trimmed. 2 of the 5 soliloquies disappear entirely, several secondary characters are deleted also. The effect is to diminish the political dimension of the play in this film. But this allows Olivier to focus on the state of Hamlet's mind. Indeed, as the opening credits fade away, Olivier is heard to intone in voiceover that this drama is the tragedy of a man who could not make up his mind. But I would be inclined to suggest that this is Olivier rather belittling his own achievement here. Olivier's Hamlet seems vigorous and incisive throughout. In his autobiography, Olivier acknowledges being influenced by a paper published by Ernest Jones in 1937. Jones had written one of the first biographies of Sigmund Freud. Jones proposes that Hamlet has an unacknowledged incestuous fascination with his mother, Queen Gertrude, and certainly Eileen Hurley, who plays her part as if she had more than a hint of the same inclination towards her son. The scene we will now consider is the infamous Get Thee to a Nunnery scene, when Prince Hamlet chooses to loudly and cruelly repudiate the affections of Ophelia, thus setting her along the path to madness. Some questions for you to think about as you watch these next 2 scenes. Question 1. The room in which Hamlet and Ophelia meet is wide and almost unfurnished. What is this meant to suggest to us? Question 2. How do we get to the famous to be or not to be soliloquy, which is coming up? Here comes a very young Jean Simmons playing Ophelia in Bridal White.
Read on this book. That sure such an exercise may color your loneliness. Gracious, so please you, we'll bestow ourselves. Ophelia, walk you here. Let's withdraw, my lord.
Soft you now, the fair Ophelia. Nymph, in thy orisons be all my sins remembered.
Good my lord. How does your honor for this many a day?
I humbly thank you. Well, well, well.
My lord, I have remembrances of yours that I have longed long to redeliver. I pray you now receive them.
No, not I. I never gave you aught.
My honored lord, you know right well you did. And with them words of so sweet breath composed as made the things more rich. Their perfume lost, take these again. For to the noble mind rich gifts wax poor when givers prove unkind. There, my lord.
Are you honest?
My lord.
I did love you once.
Indeed, my lord, you made me believe so.
You should not have believed me. Get thee to a nunnery. Why wouldst thou be a breeder of sinners? I am myself indifferent honest, but yet I could accuse me of such things that it were better my mother had not borne me. I am very proud, revengeful, ambitious. More offenses at my beck than I have thoughts to put them in, imagination to give them shape or time to act them in. What should such fellows as I do, crawling between heaven and earth? We are errant knaves all, believe none of us. Go thy ways to a nunnery. Where's your father?
At home, my lord.
Let the doors be shut upon him, that he may play the fool nowhere but in his own house. Farewell!
Oh, help me, you sweet heaven.
I have heard of your paintings too well enough. God has given you one face and you make yourselves another. You jig, you amble, you lisp, you nickname God's creatures and make your wantonness your ignorance. Get thee to a nunnery and quickly too. Farewell. Or if thou with needs marry a fool, for wise men know well enough what monsters you make of them. Go to, I know more of it.
It has made me mad. I say we will have no more marriages. Those that are married already, all but one, shall live. The rest shall stay as they are. To a nunnery. Go.
Love, his affections do not that way tend. Nor what he spake, though it lacked form a little, was not like madness. There's something in his soul, for which his melancholy sits on brood. And I do fear the unheeded consequence will be some danger. which to prevent I have in quick determination set it down. He shall with speed to England. Haply the seas and countries different with variable objects shall expel this something settled matter in his heart. What think you on't?
It shall do well, but yet I do believe the origin and commencement of his grief sprung from neglected love. How now, Ophelia? You need not tell us what Lord Hamlet said. We heard. My lord, do as you please.
It shall be so. Madness in great ones must not unwatched go.
To be, that is the question. Whether it is nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing end them, to die, to sleep no more, and by a sleep to say we end the heartache and the thousand natural shocks that flesh is heir to. 'Tis a consummation devoutly to be wished, to die, to sleep, to sleep. A chance to dream. Aye, there's the rub. For in that sleep of death, what dreams may come when we have shuffled off this mortal coil must give us pause. There's the respect that makes calamity of so long life. For who would bear the whips and scorns of time, the oppressor's wrong, the proud man's contumely, the pangs of despised love, the law's delays, the insolence of office, and the spurns that patient merit of the unworthy takes, when he himself might his quietus make with a bare bodkin? Who would fardels bear, to grunt and sweat under a weary life, but that the dread of something after death, the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveler returns, puzzles the will, and makes us rather bear those ills we have than fly to others that we know not of. Thus conscience doth make cowards of us all. And thus the native hue of resolution is sicklied o'er with the pale cast of thought. And enterprises of great pith and moment, with this regard their currents turn awry, and lose the name of action.
In answer to the first question about the room where Hamlet and Ophelia share their bitter exchange, I hope you noted that Elsinore Castle is deliberately presented here as a vast maze of echoingly underfurnished great halls and antechambers and long grey corridors, all superbly framed in depth by the cinematographer Desmond Dickinson. Is this series of baffling corridors presented subjectively, that is, as Hamlet sees them? In any event, it is impossible to work out how all these stairs and levels and halls and landings and corridors and parapets are fitted together inside and around the sprawling draughty castle. The beautifully effective design work is by Roger Furs, for which indeed he won the 1949 Oscar for Best Art Direction. So this set design of the castle as a cruel labyrinth serves very effectively to evoke the tortured states of mind of all the people who dwell so unhappily within Elsinore. Do you recall the staging of character movement in the scene? Olivier's shot sequence indicates clearly that both Ophelia and Hamlet play out their scene together in full knowledge that they are both being overheard. Thus, Hamlet's repudiation of Ophelia is especially savage and emotionally destructive. Perhaps you also notice that as Basil Sidney's fretful King Claudius stalks away out of shot, he has the line, "Madness in great ones must not unwatched go," and the camera pans back from him and shows us Ophelia in great mental distress and slipping away, quite unwatched, by the sour king or Polonius. A nice visual irony, and emblematic of much of the grace of this film, which is currently rather out of favour with modern critics. For example, Olivier's diction was much praised in 1948, though now to modern ears it may sound overly precise. Yet few contemporary British actors express as fluently so much of the poetic rhythms of Shakespeare's pentameters. The placing of the to be or not to be soliloquy is equally notable. Olivier reverses the order of Shakespeare's text here, placing it after the repudiation of Ophelia. The second question I set for you was about how Olivier chose to arrive at the moment of his great set speech. As Ophelia lies weeping, the camera pulls steeply away from her and then reverses direction to lead us through a series of overlapping whip pans, with the music rising to a hysterical pitch over the edits up a vertiginous series of steps to a high platform at the top of Elsinore, where the camera looks up at the sky and then tilts down to look over the lip of the platform to the surging sea below. Then comes the high angle down into the back of Hamlet's head that dissolves through it to the sea as Olivier begins to speak possibly the most famous line Shakespeare ever wrote. So we are effectively inside the prince's mind as he begins to recite those lines, presented partly as an interior monologue and partly spoken aloud, which seems an efficient cinematic device to mimic both Shakespeare's representation of interiority and cinema's established conventions for indicating a character's moment of extended contemplation. Olivier's dramatic pose is very theatrical here, lying on his hips in tights athwart a rock at the very lip of this platform, high above the sea. We may well smile at this composition, but I think the intention in this very contrived staging is twofold: to underline the sense of physical risk, will the prince actually follow the implication of his own logic and succumb to despair and suicide? But also to force the audience to attend to the words of this most famous of soliloquies. It's recognised as a famous set piece for the stage, and so Olivier, as director, decides to present it as a set piece for cinema. Grammatically, the staging of this scene seems much like a musical number in a screen musical, one taken from a famous Broadway show perhaps, and is presented as a cinematic example of such. The scene both interrupts the flow of narrative events, but then also accelerates that flow forward when the story resumes a forward movement.